In light of recent events with a well-known celebrity who's gotten himself into some very serious hot water over the area of consent, and a bunch of women coming up and calling him out and saying, actually, it wasn't consensual as you thought it was. Let's talk about consent and what that means. Consent to me is a very black and white thing. If somebody says yes, they mean yes. And if somebody says no, they mean no. Now, it might be that thinking about this in relationship to tea, for instance, let's look at a cup of tea. There's a great video called Tea Consent. And tea consent talks about using consent and thinking about it as a cup of tea. So you might ask your friend, would you like a cup of tea? And they say yes. And you give them a cup of tea and they drink it. You might ask your friend, do you want a cup of tea? And they say no, and you don't make them a cup of tea, and therefore they don't have a cup of tea. So what happens if your friend says, yeah, I might want a cup of tea. If you're making one, go ahead. You make a cup of tea, but then they decide they don't want to drink it. You don't force it down their throat. You just leave that cup of tea to sit there and get cold. What if you bring your friend a cup of tea and they suddenly fall asleep? You don't ram that cup of tea down their throat, do you? You just leave the cup in front of them. And what if they decide that they didn't think that they wanted a cup of tea, but actually now they do? So in that case, you might say, oh, that's great. I'll go off and make you a cup of tea. What you don't do is ram that cup of tea down their throat if they say no, ram that cup of tea down their throat if they decide not to drink it, or ram that cup of tea down their throat if they suddenly fall asleep, pass out, whatever. Just simply, if they don't want a cup of tea, don't force it on them.